La Gran Logia de Chile es una institución laica, integrada por personas de espíritu libre. Su estructura fundamental se basa en un sistema educativo, tradicional y simbólico, realizado a través de un proceso de perfeccionamiento personal. Exalta la virtud y dignidad del ser humano, promoviendo la solidaridad y la justicia social, y establece puentes para enlazar el pensar, el decir, el sentir y el actuar en beneficio de la humanidad.
Mari Mari Pulamien, Mari Mari Pupeñi, Mari Mari Compuché. Buenos días a todos y a todas. Encantado de tenerlos una nueva jornada de nuestra Semana del Clima 2020. Estamos comenzando la quinta jornada, la quinta de 6 jornadas, porque continuaremos mañana con la jornada
tomorrow with the closure day, and this afternoon we will have a cultural meeting. My name is Rodrigo Ignal. It's a great pleasure for me to talk to you, and this time I will talk about a very interesting topic, as well as the other topics, which is known the global ethical challenges of climate change, the city looking for the balance with nature. So we have a program that we will try to make the most of it, because you know that we have the possibility or the availability of simultaneous translation in the lower part of Zoom. And then there you will find the possibility to have simultaneous translation. And once again, we would like to welcome our authorities, the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Chile, the authorities of the Grand Lodge of Chile, the female Grand Lodge of Chile as well. And we have people from other countries as well. So with nothing further to say, and with the intent of making the most out of this day, I'd like to welcome Mr. Rodolfo Augusto Soto. He's the temple guard of the Grand Lodge of Chile on this particular day. Dear Rodolfo, the floor is yours. Thank you so much, Rodrigo. Good morning. Good morning, everyone who are connected today. On behalf of the Grand Lodge of Chile, especially on behalf of the Grand Master Sebastián Jan Perez, it's a great pleasure to me to welcome you to the fifth day of the Climate Week 2020, organized by the Sustainability and Climate Change Commission of the Grand Lodge of Chile. This time we have very important lecturers, national and international, that were highly trained in the affairs that they will show us under the motto, the ethical challenges of climate change, the city in the pursuit of the balance with nature. So talking about ethical challenges of climate change at a world level takes us to look for mankind, and to look for mankind in the causes of this almost economicus has actually made for climate change. Different lecturers have mentioned this. They have mentioned the activities of mankind that are looking for a better quality of life, and this of course has makes us don't use properly the natural resources of the earth, and the earth is starting to show the consequences of the actions of humankind. So we've started a transition to a more educated society that is marked by the ecological contradictions, the participation of every single one of us in our daily lives, the work of every single economical agent in our own activities, from the small company until the large international companies, as well as state organisms and also intermediate organizations. For example, the working unions, market federations, NGOs, among others. All of them are essential and critical for an efficient action, because the most important thing is the future of mankind. So what's pushing us to do something is the understanding that climate change that cannot be controlled can transform human life on Earth even harder than it is. Actually, it could be impossible to live in this planet. We know the responsibility or the accountability principle that the German philosopher Hans Jonas mentioned in the late 1970s. He mentioned a few things about ecology, and he said, behave in such a way that the effects of your behavior should be compatible with the permanence of an authentically human life on Earth. So, from this point on, we should conceive a contemporary social life that includes the concern about sustainability in the long term. And of course, it should shelter future generations considering our responsibilities. So, based on what I've said, it is possible to create a decarbonized society so that we can concentrate climate actions, transition climate actions in city management. And of course, we should do and perform these actions in an articulated manner and collaboratively manner, internationally speaking. So why should we start with cities? Because cities produce 3/4 of greenhouse gas emissions, and they consume 2/3 of the total amount of energy. Approximately 70% of cities all over the planet have already facing the consequences of climate change, and most of them are in danger. So these figures have been taken by Van Hessinger, a specialist and consultant on UNDP, especially regarding policies related to climate. And it is shown different aspects, such as the vulnerability on climate change. And of course, they make us reflect on this issue. It is obvious that cities must have action plans, climate action plans, which of course can be structured based on three main axes: the reduction of CO2 emissions, the increase of resiliency, and finally, education. The reduction of carbon emissions, as it was mentioned by this specialist, refers to the transition on the mass transportation media and also the energy transmission and recycling as well. We should also talk about the renovation of urban structures in order to reach sustainable schematics. This particular axis includes the adaptation of territories to climate change and the management and prevention of risks, the strengthening of circular economy systems, local economy systems, and of course, the starting up of decentralized energy system for the generation, distribution, and commercialization of excellence on renewable energies. So in this affair, education has an important role to play, educating citizens, especially younger citizens, as young as possible, so that they can execute the transitions in an orderly fashion, but at the same time accelerated way, in order to install an ecological culture that can be perfected over time. For example, consuming habits, so that the electric matrix should be based on renewable energies. Cities must have, regarding climate, of course, must have some important social measures that aim to get some very important social, environmental, and economical and public health benefits, especially on the most vulnerable community and low-income communities. Ethics determines the decency of every single commitment. So the capability to mobilize allowed us to do something and to establish some methods to decide between contradictory interest and to set priorities, because ethics facilitates the articulation between theory and practice of the general principles and the political will, and from awareness at a world level, and also the application of some specific measures at a local level. Thank you very much. Have a great day, and welcome to this day number 5.
Hola, buenos días.
Hello, good morning. My name is Guido Asensio, and I will continue with the presentations. Rodrigo also made an introduction, the initial introduction. Thank you so much also to Mr. Rodolfo Agurto, the Grand Warden of the Grand Lodge of Chile. So I will introduce a little bit to everyone to this important event. The global ethical challenges that are rooted on climate change constitute a relevant issue that should be addressed today, considering that the consequences of the increasing temperature are more evident, which has transformed into one of the most important topics that should be addressed all over the world. But they should not only be treated scientifically, because the challenge also has to do with human behavior when it comes to facing this particular situation. So it is essential to establish an education from the from early stages in order to raise awareness and the mentality that is needed for this particular task. This task will be fulfilled as every single challenge is taken seriously, especially regarding the 2030 agenda of the UN, in which this topic will be addressed based on the generation of a set of different issues, in which education for sustainable development is actually one of them, as well as other implicit elements that aim at strengthening situations in which we can generate observatories on climate change from natural situation, cultural situations that can actually be the natural heritage of UNESCO. So it is known by different projects that raise awareness on population that the most important thing has to do with the understanding of this ethical challenge, which is to find balance. And this will be a task that shouldn't take steps back. So in this particular opportunity, we will address some specific initiatives that are showing specific changes in the ways of living and the ways of behaving in society. This way, we can feel that the race of improving the current condition has already started. The important thing is to acknowledge some valid alternatives that some of our lecturers will share with us in order to show that there are initiatives that can be replicated in our daily lives. So to start our day, I'd like to introduce Mr. Simone Tripetti. He was born in Rome and he graduated as an engineer management at the Degli Studi University in Rome. During his career at Enel, he has the opportunity to diversify and use his professional experience moving from different areas that have allowed him to know the energy industry in a very deep way. Considering his path on generation, he has moved towards energy management and also trading on CO2. On 2015, he's moved to Chile to start a new professional challenge by assuming the head market distribution in our country. And of course, he has a new role in Enel regarding Enel X Chile in 2017, and he generated the regional structure of Enel X Latam, and he took as a head of Enel South America. So, dear Simon, thank you so much for sharing with us, and the floor is yours to share with us the presentation, the public transportation on low emissions, its contribution to a sustainable development, after the corporate video that will be played right now.
Every moment is an opportunity to live, to improve, to innovate. Change your point of view. It's the beginning. Take on everyday challenges in a new light.
To live in safer and smarter cities.
Move everywhere in a different way.
To continue the journey towards a sustainable and clean future.
Take smart solutions into work.
To bring flexibility, innovation, and resilience to the business.
Value every daily choice.
To meet everyday needs in a simple and safe way.
Find out a new lifestyle.
To experience new spaces of technology and well-being.
We know every moment is the right one. We make opportunities happen.
Hola a todos. Muchas gracias por invitarme.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to the Climate Week and for giving me the chance to contribute a little bit with the experience that the NL Group has on the concept of solutions that somehow leverage the electrical technology for energy transition and also towards a future that we have mentioned, a sustainable future as well. So I will rapidly talk to you on what the experience that we have is particularly the experience in Chile, considering public transportation, sustainable public transportation, of course, electric transportation, and its contribution towards a sustainable development. So first of all, a brief introduction. What is the Enel Group? Well, in the world is the first operator with 73 million final users, and and of course, it is worth mentioning about this because considering the context of this day, we are the largest private operator when it comes to the source of renewable energies with 46 gigawatts of power that it is generated in different countries all over the world. And at the same time, we are a company that is looking to the future. And we know that it is fundamental to have resources managed in a more efficient way. We shouldn't only generate in a renewable manner, but also to generate and consume properly in a respectful way, considering the shortage of the sources that we use. And because of this, we have taken some flexibility programs that help to generate a better management, a proper management, not only about generation, but also considering the dynamic properties of energy. So today we have more than 6 gigawatts of demand response performing all over the planet. And finally, we have 70 million customers that are benefited out of our services, and they can interact with us so that they can be more proactive when it comes to facing these opportunities and these challenges of climate change. Can we move to the next slide? And we, particularly as NLX, that I represent being the responsible of the business of NLX in Latin America, we are present in 26 countries all over the world. That's the map that you are seeing right here. And in these 26 countries, we offer different solutions based on 6 business lines, considering solutions for cities, considering solutions for the industry and the corporate sector as well, solutions also for households, for clients, the owners in general, that they, of course, interact with us in different ways, particularly because they get their power bill, and also some solutions which contributes to talk in this particular context for electric mobility, and also solution when it comes to the access of some finance products and payment products that should be more digitalized, more digital in general. And finally, solutions for connectivity of the Internet of Things and the telephone industry in Latam. In Latam, particularly, we are present considering these 6 lines of solutions. We are present in 5 countries: Chile, Colombia, Peru, Argentina, and Brazil. And despite of this, as we can see in other countries, we have some specific projects that are working today that allow us to widen the capabilities of our solutions in Latin America. Can we continue with the next slide, please? So a little bit of context. Latam, the Latin American region, is characterized by some trends. And I'm saying this because it helps us to understand why we have developed some solutions. First of all, urbanization, right? More than 14% of the population of Latin America lives in 6 macro cities that, since they have more than 10 million inhabitants, they fall under the definition of mega cities when it comes to the definition of the UN. So in these macro cities, the most important challenge is transportation. 5 out of the largest cities in Latin America unfortunately, lead the ranking of traffic at a world level. In these macro cities, another important challenge is the quality of life, because the citizen is becoming more empowered through digital tools, and the citizen values connectivity, the speed of information, the availability of information, and of course, the safety, considering his or her daily life in these cities. And finally, of course, environment. We know that environment and pollution is one of the most important challenges of cities in Latin America. So because of these trends, if we continue with the next slide, because of these trends, one of the most important axes that we have developed for a few years in Latin America is the perspective on the opportunities that are provided by public transportation. Public transportation is fundamental for cities in Latin America because we have a huge imbalance and inequality at a social level that avoids people from thinking to move as they use public transportation. But public transportation in Latin America is at an innovation stage. Today, we have very old buses that have been working for 15 years and even more. So they are stressed, they have been used a lot, and they don't have the proper technologies that do not help the environment, of course. Sometimes they don't even are uh, Euro 5 diesel or Euro 6 diesel. So we have a huge opportunity there. And today in Latin America and the Caribbean, we have more than 1,000 electric buses performing in our street at in 8 countries specifically. So this is a trend that has started. This is a trend that puts Latin America in the second place after China, of course, considering the development of electric vehicles in public transportation. So if we leave China out of the game, Latin America can lead this particular change. Of course, it is also important to say that out of these 1,000 buses, the contribution of NLX is more than 50% because we have several projects, ongoing projects in Chile, in Colombia, and Peru, and Uruguay that have, as I call them, they have the NLX chip, the NLX inside, particularly in these bus projects. And I will talk about this in a few minutes. So the trend is going up. We believe that by 2020, we will have approximately 7,000 buses in Latin America. Next slide, please. So why are we doing this? First of all, because electric buses solve a problem when it comes to helping pollution, local pollution in these big cities. But the second important point is that this that is ethically viable and necessary, economically and technologically speaking, is also sustainable. Being sustainable, technological speaking, well, this is a matter for technicians and mathematicians because the number of electric vehicles at the world is rising on a daily basis. So being this properly made when it comes to the economy, that's also something that we can prove because we have thousands of buses operating in Chile, and the operators of these particular buses have positive profits. And we can say today that the operational cost of an electric bus is 74% lower than a diesel bus in the same line. So these are data related to experiences, related to business operation experiences on electric buses that have been part of the study that was introduced by the World Bank regarding the implementation of the bus implementation in Santiago of Chile in 2008. So these are official numbers that you can check them if you want to analyze them or review them. Can we continue, please? So another aspect, I've talked about the ethical challenges, yes, and public transportation, of course, has some benefits beyond technology. The benefit considering the saving on CO2 emissions, and this is obvious, and it has been certified emissions provided to this operator by the means of an official certification. But at the same time, the electric bus generates an ecosystem of an improvement in the quality of life. So projects go beyond just financing or funding the buses because we also generate an experience of use on this particular means of transportation that is very different. We're not only talking about buses, we're talking about smart bus stations, we're talking about BRT, bus rapid transit areas in which they move as if it was a surface subway, for example. We save time, we are more accurate when it comes to time, we can provide more accurate information to the citizens that are waiting in the bus stations, along with some specific systems that have to do with Wi-Fi technology, cell phone recharge. It's a different life experience. And this, of course, we are committed to this because we believe that this also follows at least three of the sustainable development goals established by the United Nations. And Enel, of course, is contributed to this. We're talking about cities and communities that are more sustainable over time, and we have a more efficient management of industry, and of course, the struggle against climate change. All of these things are so evident that actually we believe that climate change towards a sustainable public transportation shouldn't have or shouldn't move backwards, basically. Let's continue. Now, I've talked about why are we able to do this? Well, first of all, because it's ethically needed, because climate change is asking for this. And finally, as I said before, because it is economically properly to do it. And the business model that we started in Chile, particularly, also was granted an award by the International Union of Public Transportation at Stockholm in 2019 as an innovation project when it comes to funding. And this is extremely relevant because it shows that in order to be economically competitive, if we start an organization that is interacting between the public sector and the private sector, such as the example of the Chilean project in which the government actually gave some warranties towards the protection of the investor, and the investor provided the technology, the infrastructure, and of course, the technical knowledge. And finally, the operator provided its trust on a new use of a new technology, and this kind of operation fits perfectly with what we want to do. And this is shown, and this has been taken for more than 10 years, as we have said before, and we have positive figures for this particular change. So we are being so successful in the Chilean model that after this, we have seen that if we provide the opportunity to other countries, to public entities in other countries of visiting, for example, of experiencing the project, the Chilean project, they are, well, generating new opportunities. Today, for example, as NLX, we are developing some new opportunities. We have them in Chile, of course, with the new bidding process of public transportation, and as well with the mining sector that it's also evolving towards that direction, but as well in other nations. We have projects in Bogota with the first articulated 18 meters bus. We are finishing the construction of 4 bus terminals that uh, 480 buses will recharge, electric buses, of course, that are operating in Bogota. In Brazil, particularly, we have 2 ongoing projects for Salvador de Bahia for 299 buses. And for Sao Paulo, particularly, we are negotiating a project with some particular operator that will change 1,200 buses to electric buses within 5 years. So we are also operating the first electric bus in Lima, Peru. We're gathering data for that so that by 2021, we can start that particular operation to change all buses with electric buses. And we are also in Uruguay, for example, with the smart recharge platform for the first 20 buses with the CUSA operator in Montevideo. And we are leading a project for the recharge of more than 80 buses of that same operator for next year. And in Mexico, particularly with Metrobus, we are wrapping up a project for the first 10 electric buses in with a business line that should open the path for a more relevant change, because we have more opportunities to do in Mexico in order to introduce them in Mexico City with more than 700 electric buses. So yes, we have a clear trend, a strong trend, an obvious trend that can that is good for the expectations that we have considering this opportunity. So let's continue, please. Now, there are some challenges, of course. Um, we've talked about efforts, we've talked about the role that NLX has today when it comes to participating in this revolution. So we need to move forward. So we need to be capable of having more investors, more entities, and we have identified 4 points to promote public transportation, public transportation with some alliances between the public sector and the private sector. And we need to be capable of knowing what the audience and the public wants, especially for the investors that want to change towards electric vehicles. Now, from the private point of view, we need to provide the specific knowledge, the specific capability as well, and the infrastructure so that this, through the public and private alliance that has worked in Chile, we can keep promoting this particular idea. And at the same time, we should talk about the financial partnership, because the first project have been funded through utilities. We as NL, for example, not only we as NL, but other utilities have funded the purchase of the first buses. And actually, we should be capable of understanding that this ecosystem must count the participation of financial institutions that are just watching this from a distance. They haven't been strong about this. We also need some regulatory changes, because generally speaking, the inclusion of electromobility requires the first push from regulators, and we are still not quite there. Actually, in Chile, we still have a lot of space so that the regulators can be even more helpful for the electric mobility. And finally, the last point, and I'm concluding with this, we need to be brave to be the first. We shouldn't be afraid of change. because waiting for this technology to evolve is important, but we are at a level in which we have been able to show that economically speaking, this is way better than the old technology. So we should leave our fears aside and start working on this. That's another invitation. That's another challenge. And with this, I'm concluding my presentation. Thank you so much.
Okay, so now it's working. Thank you. Our presenter is Rodrigo Morera. He switched orders. Switch order because Cristian Retamal was supposed to present now, but it's just a small change. Mr. Rodrigo Morera, has a degree in economy from the Pompeu Fabra University of Barcelona, Spain, and a master in sciences in environment and development by the King College University in London, England. Has courses in specialization, urban planification, and sustainability by the Nanyang University, Technological University of Singapore, and risk management with the Queensland University of Australia, and currently works as a task manager in representation of in Chile, in charge of the project for climate being fund in the global environmental facility. And he previously worked as a consultant for the CEPAL and the worldwide mechanism for the fight against the certifications for the UN, and health projects for management for sustainability for WSSP Chile, director of projects for Rubik's sustainability, and additionally has been a master professor in strategies for the University of the Business School of the Adolfo Ibáñez University. So, dear Rodrigo, thank you for joining us today. You can begin your presentation called Biodiversity and Alternatives for Funding and the Search for Solutions Based in Nature. After a video. Today, in 1945, the Constitution of FAO in Quebec was signed. During the first years, FAO was installed in Washington, D.C. before moving to Rome in 1951.
A great world plan which will put common sense into the affairs of men. A plan which will put politics and economics on the road to world prosperity and world peace.
Cuando se fundó la FAO, el mundo acababa de
Once
salir
the FAO was funded, the world was just leaving the Second World War behind, and the world was hungry. Founders of the FAO believed that agriculture was the cornerstone of human development, and during the last years, the world has advanced in the struggle against poverty, hunger, malnutrition, and there's still challenges. Nowadays, there are too many people that don't have 3 healthy foods a day. And even before COVID-19, over 2 million people didn't have regular access to food, and lots of people were growing hungry. The economic disturbance caused by the pandemic has threatened to push 130 million people towards hunger by the end of the year, and FAO's mission are as relevant as ever. During these last 75 years, FAO and its associates have worked hand in hand with the communities where environmental and food safety have been threatened by conflicts, environmental disasters, economic crises, and plagues. To address these challenges, we would have to use the data technology and the necessary innovations, and we would work together with associates, new and old. Good morning, everyone. And I'm sharing screen right now. First of all, I want to thank the Grand Lodge of Chile for the invitation, the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Chile, and the Temple Warden of the Grand Lodge of Chile, Roberto Bustos. I am Rodrigo Morena, the coordinator of the portfolio of environmental projects for the FAO organization in Chile, and I've been invited to talk about biodiversity and climate funding and how to progress in solution space in nature for this great challenge that is gathering us together. And I want to ask a rhetorical question. And if you know, what is the role of Chile's Chile's swamps in climate change? And to answer that will come later, I want to ask about biodiversity and the relevance of biodiversity. Biodiversity is the variety of genes, species, and ecosystems that generate as a result of the evolution processes in time. And I've put a variety of fruits and vegetables because it's the International Year of Fruits and Vegetables. That's a very relevant topic for FAO on an international level. And biodiversity is not only diversity, but interaction between these different varieties and species of different kingdoms: animal kingdom, vegetable kingdom, fungi, monera, bacteria, microorganisms, protists, amoebas, and other types of microorganisms. And if we see the presentation here, they are absolutely articulated, interconnected, all these species to generate biodiversity and ecosystems on which we depend. What is the relevance of biodiversity? The relevance of biodiversity is not just that it's present, but also provides a series of services and benefits that we call ecosystemic services. First of all, we have ecosystemic services of regulation, meaning all the benefits derived from the regulation of processes, such as the regulation of pests that we are seeing today that has grown out of control due to this deregulation between ecosystems, animal ecosystems, environmental, human. Climate regulation, pollination, purification of water. We have the services for provisioning, and that means all the provisioning of products, the delivery of products necessary for our development, food, uh, wood, fiber, etc., cultural services, all the non-material benefits derived from ecosystems. We have services such as a spiritual, recreational, aesthetic, educational, landscaping, all the uses we give biodiversity and ecosystems and nature that finally generate value for us as society, and then support services. All the factors necessary to produce ecosystemic services, such as the ecological cycle, nutrient cycles in the ground, the primary production that allows us to access to these provisioning services. So we have a cultural value, a spiritual value, and we also have an economic value around biodiversity. And this economical value was estimated by the World Economic Forum in about $44 billion. And I'm talking about billion dollars, trillion, meaning trillion dollars, thousands of millions of dollars. This is half of the world's GDP. And this study states that half of the GDP depends on the biodiversity of its services. So, however, now we are in a way directly affecting this economical value, cultural value, spiritual value. And as Antonio Gutierrez, the General Secretary of the UN, today mankind is waging war against nature, and we really need to rebuild this relationship. So, biodiversity is facing the largest extinction registered in a million years. In Chile, 70% of fishing companies are overexploited or collapsed, and the species classified by the Environmental Ministry as 65% are threatened. And evidently, this has an effect on climate change. And this is bidirectional. This produces this is an interrelationship between climate change and biodiversity. And on the main drivers for climate change are the main causes for degradation of biodiversity, exploitation, overexploitation of natural resources, contamination. They have an effect on biodiversity and climate change. Now, in climate change, this generates pressure on the use of soil, new soil uses, and moving forward on new productive uses, as we're seeing, and the transportation of productive and this creates more pressure on the natural resources and invasive exotic species. This is just one of the causes for degradation of biodiversity on a worldwide level. And this loss of biodiversity implies a loss of carbon and lower capacity of carbon capture, lower regulation capacity in terms of hydric cycles or other type of ecosystemic services as the ones I mentioned before. However, we can escape this vicious cycle that we are living today thanks to biodiversity and via solutions based in nature that allow us to adapt and mitigate the effects for climate change. And what are we talking about when we say solutions based in nature? We're referring to activities based in protection, management, improvement, and restoration of natural capital to develop an infrastructure that's resistant and resilient to climate change. So if there is a great array of it's just related to adaptation and reduction of disaster risk and related to the mitigation of climate change and the capacity for reducing or capturing or stop the emission of greenhouse effect gases. From the point of view of adaptation and reduction of natural disasters, I have a few cases as examples. And if we see water scarcity, we are used to traditional solutions such as presses, aqueducts, treating plants, and the use of materials on processes that still contribute to the emission of greenhouse gas effects. So such as the integrated management of basins, of all sorts of inclusion of permeable green areas in urban areas that allow us to capture water that can lead us to solutions for the management of hydro resources and contributing to the improvement of biodiversity, conservation of biodiversity, and the capture of greenhouse effect gases via the generation of vegetation. So in the case of floods and the prevention of these adverse effects of extreme climate events, so the traditional solutions are the reconditioning and the improvement of water systems, where we have solutions based in nature, such as green roofs, urban gardens, restoration of vegetation. In the case of mitigation, and here I'm answering my own question a bit, we have solutions based in nature and the potential of carbon capture. This most important, perhaps, that we are seeing today. So these are the most potent carbon recovering in the world, systems in the world, and these do far more than other types of vegetation in the world. So in Chile, we have a great amount of peat bogs in southern Chile, in Aysén, Patagonia. But nowadays, we don't really know what's the state like. We don't really have concrete actions for conservation, and they're being exploited for their use within the mining law, for example, for use as wood, as firewood. And that means that there's an important amount of carbon being released instead of conserving this resource. How do we keep this resource? How do we move forward? So through funding, today there is a breach, a gap for funding that is quite important. One estimated 711,000 million, which is about Switzerland's GDP, at least 1% of the worldwide GDP, or 3.5 times the fortune of Jeff Bezos. Since Switzerland is not going to give us the GDP, and Jeff Bezos is not going to give us his fortune to work against the restoration of biodiversity, we need to find other alternatives. First of all, reducing harmful activities, improving chains of supplies, and ensuring that activities that nowadays are degrading biodiversity stop doing so, such as the case of the peat bogs that are exploited as a mining resource nowadays. Investing in a more smart manner, infrastructures that nowadays is being invested for the development of our territories, of our communities, that could be that could move from traditional investments to solutions based in nature, and generating new incomes through budgets and green financing projects. And what's the green fundings we have now? Multilateral funds, the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environmental Facility, the Adaptation Fund, the International Financial Institution Bilateral Cooperation. That as an organization, we try to leverage this funding for adaptation and mitigation projects in the country. Fiscal resources, of course, ordinary specific taxes, green bonds, blue bonds, and emissions for conservation projects and restoration. Blue bonds is the same thing, but oriented to sea resources and the private sectors, of course. We have mechanisms of payment per service, environmental service, environmental banks that seek to fund private or community initiatives through private funders that are somehow interested in contributing to conservation and markets. I want to stop here in a little bit in the role of the Green Fund, which is a multilateral fund in the framework of the agreement of the UN and for climate change, that's constituted to contribute to practices for mitigation and adaptation to climate change for countries in developing countries. And it has both ways, has funding for the private sector through loans, through investment funds for the private projects, warranties to ensure these projects help to fight against climate change, and subsidies and funding, direct funding to countries for the development of projects. So through this new modality, which is a payment per result, that also acknowledges the efforts of the country in this fight. So what's the role of the FAO in this? We collaborate with the state of Chile. We work together with the public services to identify the main problems, the gaps that we have today to move forward in this fight against climate change through solutions based in nature. And we manage and leverage resources of multilateral funds for project development. And today we're funding the Logia process, which is one with the restoration in areas in southern Chile, and the project based in results that I will detail briefly later. And the project that was just approved today that will begin design for the Global Development Facility, which is a project for restoration for the Mediterranean area. And then as an example and show what we're doing, and to wrap this up, this project for payment space and results for 2014-2016, this fund is acknowledging and crediting the reduction of the total of 18 tons of carbon done by Chile through the conservation and management of its forest patrimony during the years 2014-2016, equivalent to $16.3 million. So they're giving us as a prize, so to say, about almost $64 million in order to move forward on these progress in the restoration of our vegetal resources against the fight of climate change. So this will be done through sustainable forest management, forest planification, ecological restoration, and forestation and regeneration of vegetation through forestation projects, recovering of vegetable cover, generation of ecosystemic services, and stronger environmental fiscalization, environmental education in communities and public services, adaptive management, seed centers, plant conditioning, etc. So how is this going to work? We have a 20% that is going to go to technical management, infrastructure, equipment, and that 80% goes to regional implementation. Maule and Los Lagos were the regions that could credit this decrease in emissions. So this will be done through the distribution of service benefits, and it establishes 50% of equity, 20% of efficiency, and a 10% of solidarity for the distribution within the regions. So this is going to deploy through 50% in emblematic projects in protected areas, physical grids, and then priority sites, and 50% in open context to small owners, indigenous communities defined by the regional works, so they can be relevant and address the needs and priorities of each one of these regions. So with this, I bid you farewell because I have to go. We have the first director committee for this project that is going to formally begin this now at 11. So thank you once again. Unfortunately, I cannot stay for the Q&A, but I am at your disposal to receive them in my email here. And I have the presentation available. I have the references of all the information I'm giving. Thank you so much, and a warm greeting to everyone. All right, thank you, dear Rodrigo. In order to continue with the presentations, I will introduce now Mr. Cristian Redamal Gonzalez. Our presenter is a civil engineer of the Catholic University of Chile, Master of Sciences of the Master of Sciences in Environmental Resources from the University of Amsterdam, with over 15 years of experience in sustainable development, resilient and low carbon emission development, and has worked for entities in the public sector, private sector, and for climate coalitions, international cooperation, and work agencies, as assessed in international states and in the agreements for the Convention of the UN on Climate Change, and has enabled national processes and participation mitigation measures, adaptation measures, and assessing collateral benefits for climate policies. And he knows the international climate policy and the Convention of the UN on Climate Change. So dear Christian, thank you for being with us today, and you can begin your presentation called Climate Migrations, Growing Trends Worldwide, after the corporate video on migrations. Thank you.
22 million people were forced to flee their homes in 2013 because of natural disasters. By 2050, the number displaced could reach up to 200 to 250 million, according to worst forecasts. Most migrants are likely to be displaced internally within developing nations due to an increase in climate-related phenomena like drought, floods, and rising sea levels. In Bangladesh, up to 1 million people are forced to uproot each year, either temporarily or permanently, as homes and rice paddies are repeatedly flooded. International migration or the evacuation of entire populations may be the only option for some communities over the next century. Inhabitants of low-lying island states threatened by sea level rise are starting to consider resettling as a community on safer land. The Maldives, for example, plans to build artificial floating islands. or dispersing and integrating into new cultures abroad. Kiribati has purchased land in neighbouring Fiji. Areas prone to extreme weather events are found across the world. Today, this new category of involuntary migrant is not protected under international law in the same way as refugees displaced by war or human rights abuses. But the impact of slow onset environmental changes is likely to lead to a flood of future demands for a recognised climate change refugee status.
Hola, buenos días. ¿Sí me escuchan?
Hello, good morning. Can you hear me?
Muchas gracias por la introducción, por la...
Thank you for the introduction, the presentation, and for the invitation as well by the Grand Lodge of Chile. And I'm very happy to be able to share with you this space for reflection that I think is very interesting, and we've been doing it for a few days. So before we begin, I want to present a few slides that I have, and I want to give more context as the presenter. You said I have information. I'm from a civil engineer. You may be wondering what's a civil engineer doing, talking about migration. It's not really common. So it happens that about 5 years ago, for the COP21, for the Paris Agreement meeting, I had to accompany the formulation of commitments for several island states in the Pacific area. And in a technical workshop that I had to do in the Micronesia states, where delegates gathered from several states, island states in the Pacific. At some point, I was asked how this was going to be reflected in the Paris Agreement and how the problem of migration and due to climate changes for island states, this is really relevant. I personally had the notion of accompanying these countries with their emission reduction commitments, and that was their priority. And that means reducing actions, mitigation. So I didn't really have many answers regarding that question. And even though it was a topic that I knew existed and there were international discussions, I didn't know that much about it. And once I came back to Chile, I started investigating, and that is how I got involved in the efforts to try to have a better comprehension of how this phenomenon, or how the impacts of climate change are generating this migration phenomenon. So this has to do a little bit with the presenting this problem and how this has been moving on an international level. So you should be able to see my screen now, right? Perfect. So I have been a consultant for the Chilean presidency since the COP25. I still am. I work with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And in this context, I want to tell you a bit about the topics of human mobility. So the first thing that I want to mention is that what I'm talking about when I talk about human mobility, basically two concepts: migration, it should be a movement of people through an international border, be what it may, its magnitude, composition, causes, and people movement, which is the same as with the component of forced movement, be it between a country and another, internally, and what is also fundamental is to mention that the link between human mobility, climate change is complex and requires a conscious action and observation. I will move forward in this. So key elements to consider when we want to address this phenomenon is that migration has always been the way people, Homo sapiens, have had to interact with our environment. And there are certainly different theories on how communities have migrated historically in order to populate different areas in the planet. So it is fundamental to mention that humans have always migrated, looking for a better well-being. What's also fundamental is to understand that population movements are a multifactor phenomenon, where due to economical factors, demographic, political, social, environmental factors, individuals need to face the decision of migrating or staying in their point of origin. So what happens is that when linking environmental migration with an impact on climate change and the need to leave a habitat is complex. And what is evident is that the environmental reasons are more and more relevant in this equation, this complex equation that pretends to understand migration of individuals or the population. So to give more context on why this environmental factor is more and more relevant in the individual decisions in order to move, migrate to other settlements. It is fundamental to acknowledge the current situation we're in, and I want to introduce a concept, or go back to a concept so you know it from the Anthropocene, suggested in 2000 by the Dutch scientist Paul Crutzen, where he references the current situation we're living in the planet today, and from the Industrial Revolution, where the global impact of our situations has had in the biosphere, and there's a threshold with no possibility for return. So our footprint in the planet system has crossed a threshold, and it's not possible to go back. And this is a paradigm because it puts in evidence the concept of sustainable development. So in order to designate this degradation, was mentioned by Rodrigo Moreno, on the loss of biodiversity, biophysical challenges, modifications in water cycle, nitrogen, and increase in the human population. And what we know in relation to climate change and the increase of emissions, greenhouse effects, concentration of these in the atmosphere, that are taking us to this global. All these with the loss of inhabitants. So this nowadays, in the current times that we're living in this planet, why is it relevant to pay attention in a conscious manner to this climate and environmental migration? Due to the increase in temperature, the average temperature in the planet, and with this environmental degradation and the increase in natural disasters, individuals, communities are pushed to the need to look for a better well-being. And this makes us obviously think about the populations that were located, and probably they'll look for already existing human settlements. They will go look for new towns, new cities. So this can generate, and it's already happening in the world. This can generate tensions because it's an issue that this is always raising the previous population thing. And it happens in many countries and cities in Chile too. We're seeing it during the last few years, and this tension, obviously, can be reflected in the competition for resources, and in some cases that can also lead to conflicts. So beyond the problem of environmental issues, and obviously has repercussions in social aspects, there are elements of national security that are also fundamental to consider when we want to address and understand this phenomenon better. And the concept of human mobility and the impact of this has been related from many years. And in 2014, for the IPCC, the panel for climate change, National Panel for Climate Change, indicates that the patterns in human mobility can be a response to extreme climate events or modifications in or long-term modifications in the climate system. So this is understood as an effective strategy for adaptation to climate change. This is very relevant because the idea that I was mentioning at the beginning, that historically in this centuries and millennia, mankind has always migrated, seeking to adapt to the condition of our habitat. So the IPCC has already acknowledged this for 2014, and at the same time, and the national orders. As you know, the ICP is scientific and informs the negotiation process of the framework of the UN for Organization for Climate Change. So in 2010, at the COP in Mexico, the states already acknowledged that the population, the migration, and climate change is a challenge for adaptation, and it certainly agrees reaches a consensus to strengthen the understanding on this. And at the same time, different agencies, multilateral agencies, and initiatives, bilateral initiatives internationally are beginning to make efforts in having a better comprehension over this phenomenon. And different numbers would suggest and project amounts of population that could be forced to see how to address the environmental changes in their areas. So here's the Brownswell initiative from the World Bank comes to mind. It was published in 2018. As you can see, they are getting more involved in the migration issues due to climate change impact. So this projects that by 2050, over 140 million people, not only in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, will be forced to migrate due to the impact of climate change. And of these 140 millions, 17 millions will be forced to migrate in Latin America. That would be almost all of Chile migrating due to the impact of climate change. So we need to think about how where these people are going to relocate. Probably this migration is going to happen within the national borders in the countries. But despite that, it becomes really relevant to consider that these new inhabitants in many cities are going to have the need for assistance from the governments. So during the same process, the formal negotiation process for climate change, once this Paris Agreement arises in December 2015, in parallel, the same decision adopted by the Paris Agreement creates a task force, as it's called in the lingo, with the mission to develop recommendations with the integrated focuses to prevent, minimize, and address the movement of human population related to adverse impact of climate change. So from that, the process of international negotiation for climate change starts to, in a formal way, starts to try to identify the phenomenon, to describe it, to internalize it, gather evidence, and suggest a focus to address it. So, and with this, I will wrap up. It is fundamental to consider that it's impossible to ignore the fact that climate change and the climate crisis is affecting the problems for human mobility. Even though I mentioned that this is a multi-factor phenomenon in a context of climate emergency, this factor of the impact of climate change is more and more relevant when it comes to individuals making decisions for relocation, migration. In that sense, climate migration needs to be understood as a need more than a choice, and thus a manner of adaptation to climate change. At the same time, it is crucial to know to have a better comprehension of the link between climate change and human migration. And we know this bond exists, but we cannot determine yet the detail of it. We just have lots of projections. So the World Bank has mentioned about 140 million people, and the video I showed says 250 million people by the year 2050. So there are numbers, but all the analysis projected that hundreds of millions of people will be forced to migrate during the next few decades, and that is relevant. It is fundamental to build a consensus between the states regarding the need to address this problem in a coherent manner, protecting people and integrating migration with the local development. As I said a minute ago, the phenomenon of human mobility is already included formally in the process of negotiation with this passports project that I mentioned for the climate action entities, and it's relevant in the multilateral discussions for climate change. I will just mention this image in the lower side to show which have been the efforts of this task force that aim to identify different phenomena and policies, and synthesizing information, coordinating with other agencies in the UN, and mapping the different cases, existing cases in the world where groups of population have been forced to migrate from their habitats. So I thank you for this. I thank you for your attention, your time. And before I finish, I want to make a but there's an animal there. And if I highlight it, can everyone see it now? Everyone very clearly? There's a giraffe there. And what happens is once we identify it and we see it, it's impossible to stop looking at it. And that is what happens with migration due to the impact of climate change. Once we identify it, we cannot really ignore it anymore. Well, thank you, dear Christian, and it's a very eloquent presentation. We will continue with the presentations. Now we will invite, can you hear me well? Yes? I will invite Ms. Claudia Mellado Yancupil, our presenter as a social worker, culture, and is Mapuche. From her mother's side grandmother, she learned the art of agriculture and the importance of sharing this art. With an urban life, her grandparents always kept this connection to the earth from the culture and forming their own little farm where every seed goes comes to her hands, so she was able to share this with a great amount of territories, organizations, and communities related to agriculture, and her interest on finding identity and culture within seeds made her part of the task for recovery of traditional seeds in Chile. So for those who are here with us today on Zoom, we will inform you that during the next few minutes you will be able to ask questions using the chat with the app addressed to the moderator, me, identified here in the program as moderator. Dear Claudia, thank you for being here with us. You can begin your presentation called Food Biodiversity and Rediscovering of Superfoods in Times of Scarcity.
Mari Compuche, Inche Claudia Mellado Ñancupilpien, Tañilos Huaychahue, Huaquilaco Mapumeu, Incheta Mapuche Lasquenche. Hola a todos y todas.
Hello everyone. My name is Claudia.
Hello everyone, I am Claudia Mellado Ñancupil, I'm a Mapuche, and I want to, what I always do is to greet everyone in my native tongue, the native tongue of my people, which is the people for whom I'm doing all this work.
Aquí está. ¿Se ve la pantalla? Si alguien me
Can you
puede
see my
ver.
screen?
Sí, se ve bien. Se ve bien, estimado.
All good.
Muchas gracias. Si bien soy lafkenche, en este momento me encuentro...
Well, I'm Lafkenche. I'm currently working at a Pehuenche area in Lonquimay, so that's why my internet signal is not that good. But I wanted to share this picture of colors, explosion of colors of some seeds of quinoa seeds that we have recovered at the south of Chile. And this photograph comes from a recovery area in a Lafkenche zone. And today and the days before this, we've been cultivating this, promoting its recovery. As you know, this plant was a discarded food, but now it's a superfood. So today we will talk about different seeds, traditional seeds, which are an indigenous inheritance that are very important for the regeneration properties that it has. So we will talk about climate change and conventional agriculture, this cycle that is killing us in some other ways, the protection of biodiversity, considering the material patrimony to face this climate change, and also a traditional farming that goes beyond the soil, which means going back to the roots, considering a balanced environment with a real proposal against climate change. And of course, the heart of this agriculture that turns it into a dynamic agriculture, which is based on traditional seeds. So as a reflection, I wanted to say that this picture is a classic postal of the Araucanía region. And we can see at the background a mono forest area of pine tree. And here we have a farming area. And a lot of people take pictures on this because they think it's beautiful. But how come these areas that are polluting a lot, these monoculture areas, started to look beautiful to us? Because this is not good. This happened when we lost the pleasure of analyzing biodiversity. A study mentions that the industrial agroalimentary system contributes to the climate change with 44 and 55%. And this is due to the deforestation that it's generated to create monoculture areas, and also refrigeration, packaging, and other important areas. So the changes that this produces, I'm sorry, the changes that this has, the changes and the impact that conventional agriculture has have to do with the things that are going on in the south of Chile, with the forestry industry, with unbearable heat waves. And of course, we have environmental issues that affect the growing of different plants, and they generate a specific microclimate that is very fruitful for them, and this is destroyed because of it. The rain cycle has been affected, and we have rain in the middle of the summer, for example, nowadays. And this is also increasing prices for different grains such as soy, beans, rice, and also the cost of animal food, which increases the cost of meat. So this has to do with conventional agriculture, with a reduction of productivity and performance that is associated to a fewer availability of water and the increase of some pollutants. We lost the humidity of the soil. We have an impact on different plants, on different harvests, and the effect of some external phenomena such as forest fires that we can see on this region. We also have an impact on the phenology of plants that can be manifested on erratic growing, and also the erosion and the degradation of soil, the sedimentation of different water flows, reservoirs, flooding, a lot of catastrophe, and all of these things that I've said before that have been analyzed and massified by different institutions, NGOs, or international organizations, and even FAO. All of these things haven't been applied to traditional seeds, because even though we have some complicated growing, they are adapted. They work, but unfortunately, we have this kind of farming. Now, conventional farming also has an increase in plagues and diseases on crops, fungi, insects, viruses that affect this huge monoculture. And we also talk about a reduction of pollinizing agents. And this is very questionable. And this is mentioned in this particular study, this study on the impact of climate change. And this is very controversial because the pollinizing agents are also affected by the massive use of insecticides that are used in monoculture. So we have a sort of controversy at that particular point. Here we have another picture of a monoculture that can be seen in the northern Chile, grapefruit, which is very good, of course. But we have a monoculture that is based on this conventional agriculture that is massified all over the world, that is affecting biodiversity, because here we have one or two varieties of grapes against the thousands of varieties that we used to have, more than 20, for example, in one particular area. We're seeing the death of beneficial insects, pollution, of course, due to this monoculture, pollution of water streams that can be even worse than the mining pollution. And this kind of farming, this kind of agriculture generates another kind of damage that has to do with the content, the nutritional content that can affect plants, that can affect cultures. So, for example, calcium that a lettuce may have in a conventional agriculture, we're talking about 16 and 71 in organic agriculture. Tomatoes, for example, 4.4 to 23 in organic agriculture. So we can see that a huge amount of cultures are being affected just because of the nutritional composition that these elements have, considering the matter that is part of this. This has more minerals, this has more things, and we are talking about the composition of this particular matter, and water is almost dried, and sometimes it even is even higher than that. So culture in general is poorer in nutrients and is not even high in water, and this can generate decomposition. When we talk about the organic, ecological, clean culture, this is even higher, and of course is more beneficial to the human body. The composition of water is also generating the different, is also generating changes in the product itself, considering nutrients once again. So what do we do when it comes to facing these particular problems of monocultures and pollutions and everything that has to do with this as collateral damage? We're looking for protection and a source of biodiversity. We're looking for the indigenous people, because the indigenous perspective on this matter when it comes to the soil and what goes beyond the productivity, because they have a spiritual and deep connection with the earth. We're talking about the conservation of biodiversity that, according to FAO, the indigenous people are key to solve this, because 80% of the biodiversity of the planet is around and over the indigenous people because of the way they live. For example, the respect for the environment. So all of these things are part of this process. Let me close this. So the biodiversity of indigenous people has shown a great capability of adaptation of nature, considering climate change, desertification, the degradation of the natural resources, migration. Indigenous people have the traditional knowledge, the inherited knowledge by thousands of years that have allowed them to know and relate to Earth in a very different way. And at the same time, they have one of the richest food system in the world. They are filled with color, flavor, with different ways of cooking these meals, with ways in which this is seen as medicine. We're talking about quinoa, for example. We have amaranto. We have different perspectives despite all of this discrimination that this kind of food used to have, even though sometimes indigenous communities are not just passive victims. And this is the general reflection. Indigenous communities are change agents because they have the knowledge on how to do these particular things. So the invitation, of course, is to move towards a traditional agriculture. We need to leave the traditional agriculture behind. We need to think about different ways of growing food, considering the memory and the evolution that the traditional seeds have to face climate change. We're talking about a regenerative agriculture when we are concerned about the fertility of the soil and the well-being of soil, because we're talking about a soil that has life. But we go beyond that, because yes, I mean, we are putting the main role to the soil. It goes beyond that because we are also considering, for example, the traditional knowledge for the respect of earth, the source of biodiversity that has been transmitted generation after generation, the cultural richness that is focused on the traditional seed as the core of this particular agriculture. We're talking about the living seeds. We're talking about going back. And this is a polyculture in which we don't only have different species, we have beans, we have corn, we have lettuces, different crops. We also have different varieties of it. Polyculture is richer. We recover seeds, and this was one of the areas that we grow in the southern of Chile when we have a different perspective, because today, for example, the traditional seeds are about to become extinct. So these are pretty much lost according to some research. And considering this, we are introducing ourselves to look in every single corner so that we can do this, to recover our soil. Yes, when we started working on this, there was nothing there. We started generating everything, the transplants, growing, so that we can create a real rainforest of colors. We're talking about more than 115 varieties of beans, 100 varieties of corn, different varieties of quinoa, and lots of beans, once again, tomatoes, different colors in one particular space. We struggled against the prejudices. In these particular areas, these are people that have conventional agriculture to sell things in markets. So for them was also a shocking situation, going back in time to do things the way their grandparents used to do. So what do we do if we have a plague? What do we do if nothing grows here? For example, tomatoes never grew in that area. Who's going to purchase all of this? Who will get all of this information? Because there's a lot of things. This is what I've been told. I've always planted two different varieties, for example, and now we will have 100 varieties of one particular product. What are we going to use? So just one is going to be used as a fertilizer, but when they start seeing that there was no damage, they start to realize that they are able to produce even though they may have some sort of disease, because everything is adaptable. They adapt to the weather, they adapt to the use of soil. So I produce the food before the sale, so there's a cost there that is reduced because people are growing their own food, that aside from being healthy, we save money, because everything you used to sell as a monoculture, then you buy different kinds of food, but now you produce everything for yourself. These are more productive varieties of seeds. And they also got to know some new things, some new varieties of food. They were growing more than 100 varieties, and this has a lot of advantages. These are colorful food, and this was just because of made with guano of animals and different stimulating of algae whenever we need it. So traditional seeds are an inheritance of traditional indigenous people, Mapuche people, for example, my people. And this has to do with a lifestyle, with different ceremonies, because we share these kind of things. We consider that steam connects us with the superior energies. And when this steam goes down, we are connected with the Michemapu, which are also the energies that live below us. So these are seeds that were harvested and hunted, that were hunted by the Christianity. Quinoa, amaranto, and corn were related to these particular ceremonies that were related to different gods that we have as spiritual beings. So they were hunted and prohibited. Quinoa, for example, along with amaranto. And since they were hunted, people hided them in their hair. So the seeds for indigenous people is not just food. Yes, it is food, and they are medicine, but they are also a lifestyle. They are a spirit. We talk about traditional seeds when we talk about endemic seeds. They are part of a specific territory. They reproduce at a specific territory, and these are varieties that are produced due to climate reasons. In Chile, for example, we have different kinds of environments, and Chile is promoted or promotes this kind of material. For example, the añuñuca seeds, yauque, calafate in the south, cauye in the center of Chile, and other varieties. We have 3 minutes left. So unfortunately, these seeds are in danger, such as chaura, lucuma, and the cultures that we're seeing, they were eating potato, quinoa, mango, amaranto, peanuts, different foods that today are not being consumed in this particular area. So the native species such as potato, strawberry, yucca, now are just varieties that are being looked, that we are seeing all over again, the different colors, the nutritional capabilities that they have. So all of these things were replaced. And what's happening today? Instead of growing and promoting this particular food, for example, murta and maki, now we have strawberries and blueberries, and we don't consider other kind of food despite the fact that they have better nutritional content. We do not respect the pollination of native pollination. So these are traditional food that are filled with different stories, with local identities, with memory, that have been adapted to the evolution, and they are at risk. So now different generation, grandparents, grandmothers, granddaughters, they are working on this. So how can we help them? By growing these things. They are easily adapted to local growth. It allows the diversification. It allows biodiversity. They do not require lots of assets. They are extremely natural. They contribute to promote the traditional knowledge. They generate and they promote the traditional economy. They are not part of any kind of intellectual property. These are free for everyone, and they have capabilities, important capabilities, intense aromas, different flavors. For example, we're talking about different varieties that were replaced. For example, mango, that is an extinct variety. Quinoa was replaced by rice and wheat. Corn, for example, generates a specific fungi, and this is considered and this is treated with chemicals. However, for the Mexican people, this is a superfood with specific amino acids. This is known as the Mexican truffle. So it has anti-cancer properties. We're talking about tomatoes that are specifically prepared with specific materials. These are food that are essential and fundamental, and they can be used this way because we can see that they are very nutritious. They help people. When we have Pemo, Maki, Piñon, they have specific capabilities, carbohydrate, phosphorus, iron. They are rich in all of these things, and we're not consuming this material. In comparison to some things such as broccoli, that by 1988, for example, to date, it has lost 68% of calcium. So cultures, conventional cultures, are poor when it comes to their nutritional capabilities. We have different materials that have to do with different fruits and different materials that have great capabilities, with great nutritious capabilities, and also with medical capabilities. Quinoa, for example, it has huge nutritional properties that is rich in amino acids and different materials, and it can promote different things. We also need some minerals such as iron, zinc, calcium, phosphorus. It has thousands of different capabilities that in comparison to this, well, it has a greater potential. It's very versatile as well. It can be consumed in different ways as a dry rust, fermented, where its capabilities is stimulated. Murta, for example, has 2.5 times more antioxidants than wine. It works for different diseases as well. So these seeds are rich in different materials that are essential for the organism because it reduces cholesterol, for example, and it has some proteins. For example, the tongo rojo bean, which is a traditional variety that we can find in the north of Chile, has the nutritional capability of proteins is extremely high, and it can replace meat because it has properties for vegetarians. It has a huge content in B1, vitamins, physalis, for example. Another traditional food, uchua, huaymanto, now it is known as goldenberry, that has a protein capability of sodium and fiber that are extremely high in comparison to other cultures. Tenka tomato, which is sweet, is delicious, and it is highlighted by its capability of antioxidants, especially when it comes to tomatoes. Sweet tomato, a natural antidepressant. This is rich in the north of Chile and has calcium, magnesium, is very long lasting as well. The traditional hot pot, for example, in Chile, whenever you have it, it doesn't have the flavor that our grandmothers used to say because it doesn't have the same traditional seeds. Rather than having a white corn, murta, savache, and thousands of different varieties of corns, we just have a yellow corn. We doesn't have quinoa. We don't have rice. We have different potatoes that yes, they have a high water content, but they don't have the flavor in comparison to other kinds of potatoes. We're just using one, and we don't know what actually is. It has a name that, well, it has different names. We have thousands of colors of beans, carrots. We have different shapes, and we're not using them. We're not making the most of them. So my message is to respect nature, is to respect the different forms of living, to provide space for seeds, to open up, to be more curious, so that we can go back to grow this kind of food, to recognize these capabilities, understand that food is also medicine. They grow and they contribute to our identity. This is sent to different places to be part of this group of traditional indigenous cultures where biodiversity is protected, when we promote the Keyugun, which is the vital reciprocity in every single aspect of life, when we massified these things and the knowledge of indigenous people as well. We promote seeds, we promote the specific knowledge. We don't want the supplantation of these things. For example, everyone is buying this tomato, but the Angolino tomato is not real tomato. So we are on time, Claudia. Let me close up. So we have lots of varieties that are being lost, that are being displaced, and they are a necessary source for to fight against climate change, because we are seeing and we are adapting these seeds. They are a rich source of antioxidants to face, for example, cancer, to be more healthy. So know these seeds, look for information, get close to them, considering the different ways in which social media can provide us more information. We can find this particular path. We can find this particular information. You can find this on social media. I'm showing these pictures very rapidly so that you can check them. Please get to know these seeds in a better way. Consume this material and inherit them to future generations. So that's it, Guido. Thank you so much. Well, now let's go to the session of Q&A. And the first one is a generic question that was made to every single participant. And it goes as follows. Do you think that because of the pandemic, we'll have a sort of return of migrants from the city to the countryside and a revalorization of the countryside, including the indigenous people? That's a question for all of you. I will ask this general question, and I will make a specific question also for Christian Retamal. It says, in regards to migrations and its problems, shouldn't be good to mention birth control, because as far as I know, the highest migration is internal migration. Thank you so much for this question. So those are the first two questions. Please, Christian. Okay, thank you. Regarding the first question on the migration from the city to the countryside, I don't know if we've had enough time to have a definitive answer on this, because the pandemic and the lockdown has made very hard to travel in different regions in our country. So I think that something like that, or to provide a definitive answer to that question, well, it's still too soon to answer that question. But yes, I mean, I do believe that we may have several professionals that are thinking about living close to nature, closer to nature, considering what technology has contributed in this particular affair, due to the possibilities. For example, this meeting you planned this meeting before the pandemic, and you wouldn't expect to have this meeting online. And I believe that this technology will remain with us for a long time. And probably, I believe that the way we work and a migration of people leaving the city, well, it's too soon to tell. Regarding birth control, considering the approach that I wanted to share with you of these multilateral processes of climate change and the convention of the UN to address this issue, we need to think that the, there is an agreement of more than 180 countries that have different religions and cosmovisions and ways of living. And I believe that birth control is one of the elements to analyze, because we have billions of people today living in our world. I believe that this is a taboo thing. We're not talking about this, especially at an international, multinational context. It would make sense, of course, because the planet has a load capacity that is limited, and obviously, if every single inhabitant of our planet consumes as those people that have a better standard of living consume, our ecological footprint would be even higher. So I believe that birth control is a critical thing, but a multilateral agreement on birth control, that's something that I don't think would be discussed because of beliefs, I believe. That's what I can say about that. Thank you so much, dear Christian. Now let's go to another question. Well, let's go to Simone. This is a general question about the coronavirus pandemic. And well, there's a more specific question for you. Let me look for it. That is related to. There we go. So, how should we understand the ethical dimension on the protection of the environment and the consequences to work on this in a sustainable way? So how do we assume this challenge from the traditional cultures, for example? So we will ask this question to Mrs. Claudia Mellado, please.
No contesto yo entonces. O contesto solo la general, como quieres que...
Oh, should I answer the general? Yes, please, the general.
Simplemente sumarme un poquito también a lo que...
Well, I believe that I should continue with what Christian said. It's too soon to tell and or to say something strongly about this matter, but yes, we've seen that. I mean, we've spent several months on this, so we're talking about a considerable amount of time to reflect on new needs, on new on this new normality. As a company, for example, we've been developing some lines of solutions that we didn't have before. I'm not saying that we hadn't thought about them, but they were planned at a different time, because some trends that are related to the needs that we have seen where we already saw them before. For example, digitalization is going faster today. This event, for example, fortunately, thanks to technology, we can do this online, and that's an evidence. However, this also the iceberg summit will give us some information, because everyone needs to be connected. So some solutions require more speed, but yes, I believe that we have some stereotypes or ways of thinking that we used to have. For example, now we probably don't need people working face to face anymore. Rather than having an office, well, actually, the office is no longer a building. An office is a team of people that can work from different places. So if this mean that we will have a recovery on places outside of the city where people can work, well, we will see in the future. However, technology and experience that some companies are having on this matter, well, they are being a good response, a good positive response, considering that these things can be done. Will it be 100%? I don't think so, but we will find new ways of having a balance between face-to-face work and remote working. Would this help to clean the cities? Probably it will, but personally, I cannot answer this, but these trends are being studied properly. Thank you so much, dear Simone. So now the question for Miss Claudia. Due to the food problems that we have at a world level, how can we protect the areas of soil where we have farming activities? If every time farmers are choked due to the exporting companies and they are forced to look or to change activities and they are not protected by the state or the government, how can we ensure this process? What can we do to maintain agriculture?
Ese bárbaro, así aparece. Estimada Claudia, por favor.
Dear Claudia?
Hay dos preguntas, que es la
Es bien
genérica
amplia la pregunta, abarca varias aristas de un solo.
Well, actually, this question can be answered in different ways. I work at the farming industry, so there's a huge migration. Lots of people have go back to the fields. We're seeing lots of crops, new houses, all over the place, actually. And now we're working with FAO over here, and yes, there's a lot of migration returning to the countryside and generating their own cultures, their own crops. Now, based on what this person asked, we need laws. We need laws to protect people. And this is the responsibility of the state. Hopefully, in the new constitution, we can protect the farming patrimony that we have in the indigenous people and the farming people in general, considering the ways in which we can protect this and the protection that these areas have, not only depending on huge economic interests. It is also necessary considering the working activities that it generates, but we require regulation and it depends on the state, not, it doesn't depend on us because we can contribute with knowledge, with our work, but the state is needed to perform that protection task, especially when it comes to seeds and especially when it comes to the piracy of seeds of performed by these big companies. We need to help the small farmers, the small groups of farmers to take these seeds and to work with them properly so that they cannot be replaced in the future. So that's a state work to do there, and also awareness programs to protect this knowledge. Thank you so much. So now let's conclude this event. Before closing, on behalf of the Grand Lodge of Chile and on the Commission of Sustainability and Climate Change of the Grand Lodge of Chile, would like to thank our lecturers. First of all, thank you so much. And thank you for your answers. Thank you, Simone, Christian, Rodrigo, and Claudia. Thank you so much. And once again, we would like to thank everyone that is part of this day. So finally, I'd like to invite you for today's afternoon, where we have a cultural activity prepared to all of you. It started at 17 hours. We will have a presentation known as Deciphering the Philosophy of Indigenous People based on their symbology and symbols. And then we'll have a play when the Puma came down, and we will close this day with a musical presentation. So once again, you are invited tomorrow for the official closure of this activity, the closure of the Climate Week 2020, with some words from the Grand Masters of the Grand Lodges of different countries in our region. So thank you so much and see you soon. Thank you so much for your attention.
La Gran Logia de Chile es una institución laica, integrada por personas de espíritu libre. Su estructura fundamental se basa en un sistema educativo, tradicional y simbólico, realizado a través de un proceso de perfeccionamiento personal. Exalta la virtud y dignidad del ser humano, promoviendo la solidaridad y la justicia social, y establece puentes para enlazar el pensar, el decir, el sentir y el actuar en beneficio de la humanidad.